Good day, and thank you for joining us for the FIATech Tech Tuesday webinar. My name is Eva Keidel, and I will be your host today. Today's webinar is titled, The Value of Passive RFID in Construction Materials Management. The purpose of today's session is to debunk the myth that technology doesn't work for laydown yard management and to highlight savings in various aspects of a project. You will learn about many valuable time and cost-saving opportunities. Please know that we will have time to answer questions, so as you think of them, be sure to enter them into the question pane, and we will go through them at the end of the session. I'd like to introduce John Walker of Atlas RFID. He has many years' experience in construction materials management with projects located all over the globe. He is an early adopter to technology and is often amazed at how sometimes technology is let out of the loop when managing materials. Please welcome John Walker.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Like Eva said, my name is John Walker. Work with Atlas RFID Solutions. Been with Atlas for quite some time now. I've held various roles through operations and sales. Currently serving as the solutions engineering manager based in Birmingham, Alabama, where our corporate office is. So in addition to working with Atlas, I've been fortunate enough to work directly for some of the largest EPC firms and construction firms in the world on various projects around the globe. And one of the things that, through the years I've witnessed is really great technology advancement and really technology adoption and construction, adopting to technology is the future direction. I still think there's a little bit of hesitation in technology adoption and maybe a learning curve, stuff like that. But overall, I think that technology is finding its way within construction, and specifically around construction materials management. Back when I started, you take an RFID tag, for example, into a boardroom with a management meeting, and they think you're selling witchcraft, right? Since those years, there's been many studies to prove and validate that RFID has a role in construction, a role in supply chain, and so forth. So, really the purpose of this meeting is to discuss kind of how to implement passive RFID technology in construction materials management. So I appreciate you guys letting me present today, and look forward to hopefully talking to some of you guys during the Q&A session at the end. So the agenda today, what I want to cover is really four big buckets. So the first one is a passive RFID 101. What is a passive RFID tag? What are some of the components of the system that make up a passive RFID tag system? What are some of the applications of passive RFID tags historically around your office maybe right now, and then also how they're being used in construction. And then talk a little bit about strategies for success. So when you feel that RFID or passive RFID is a great option for improving value for your company, what are the strategies and what are the things you need to consider when implementing this type of technology? And then finally, I want to wrap it up with a little bit of system value. So talk about some of the value that we're seeing with some of our clients in the industry. So I really want to start off with the goals of the presentation. So I want to give an overview of passive RFID technology. Some of you guys may be very familiar with this, some may not. And I want to kind of set the difference between passive and active and the various different types of that technology that's out there. I want to talk about how to successfully implement passive RFID. So what are some of the success criteria and some of the things that we should be looking for during the onset of a project, during the kind of the project execution and phasing and planning phase. One of the myths that's out there is RFID is only for large projects, right? And I think that's a total misconception in the industry. I think RFID comes with, sometimes the RFID system carries a huge price tag, and it's only for a 3-train LNG project or some big SAGD facility up in Alberta. But that's totally not the case, right? And so our role as Atlas is to be an industry leader and thought leader in terms of driving down costs and providing immense value for our clients. So trying to get that larger saturation in the market, and it's not just for large projects. And how do we improve technology to make this technology available for all the industry? And then show how to avoid significant costs in your project. So as I mentioned, I'll wrap up at the end with a little bit of value that we're seeing out on the field. So we'll start with a passive RFID 101. So what is passive RFID? So how does passive RFID technology work, right? So here's the guts of a passive RFID tag, and they're pretty simple, they're pretty basic. You've got an antenna, you've got a coil, and you've got a chip. And so what happens is there's no battery on the inside of a passive RFID tag. So what happens is a signal is emitted from a reader that hits the antenna. That signal runs down through a coil, hits that chip, and the chip produces an EPC signal. So it sends out a unique signal saying, here I am, I'm tag 123, right? So it's energized by the reader, right? It's a little bit different than active RFID tag, which has traditionally been, the predominantly used type of RFID technology in construction laydown yard materials management. So really, what's the difference between passive and active? So an active RFID tag has a battery on the inside. A passive RFID tag does not. So an active sends off a signal at a ping rate, and it has a lifespan, right? It has a lifespan of anywhere from 5 to 7 years. But a passive RFID tag can be used for many, many years, right? An active RFID tag has a greater read range. A passive RFID tag has a less read range. An active RFID tag has a higher price tag, and a passive RFID tag typically has a lower price tag. And there's thousands of form, fit, and functions of those passive tags that can be used for very specific applications. So a little bit of the differences there between passive and active. So today we'll be focusing strictly on the passive RFID functionality. So where are some of the areas that you may have seen passive RFID technology outside of construction? Toll collection systems. So in some of the larger cities, down in Houston, I know there's some, and up in New York or wherever you may be, there's toll systems. So this could be like your Easy Pass or Fast Pass, whatever they're called. We don't have those in Birmingham, so but they're typically an RFID type system for passive RFID tags. Race timing, so a lot of the runners during marathons wear passive RFID tags, so when they cross the finish line, their time is calculated. And then some of the more common that we're probably all familiar with outside of our industry is pet microchip. So if Fido goes missing, they can take him to a vet, scan his neck or wherever that chip may be, provides the owner information and address to return Fido safely, right? And then the most common probably is your access card and ID badges, which quite frankly, I've got one sitting right here in front of me that lets you in and out of doors throughout your office space. So bottom line, passive RFID tags come in thousands of different form, fit, and functions. It can be found in a variety of different industries. Some of those examples, I'm going to talk more specifically about those that we're using, but you see there's hang tags, there's laminated tags that have a sticky back that can adhere to items. And there's also items that can be, or tags that could be like zip tied to items as well, like the gray tag here in the middle. So what are some of the components that make up a passive RFID system? So obviously you got your passive RFID tags. That's kind of a no-brainer right there. You've got your readers. So, an example would be a handheld reader. So an example of a TSL 1128. It's kind of a gun type reader. You've got an antenna here, and you got a trigger to engage the RFID reader. You got vehicle mount readers. So it's a truck that has antennas and a reader on the inside that can drive around your yards and pick up locations of RFID tags. Choke point readers. So these are fixed readers at the entrance or exits of facilities that read tags. And obviously your mobile devices that compute the reads and push them into information for you to take action upon, right? So an example of a phone that could be used to pick up the RFID reads. So what are some of the tags that we're using in construction? So over the past few years, we've deployed millions of RFID tags out into the construction industry. And the three examples that I'm going to show up here are some of the most common that we typically put out into the market space. So the first one here is called a William Frick. It's a type of hang tag. This is very, very durable, very thick. It's kind of a laminated type material. Temperature resistant and moisture and UV resistant, oil resistant. It's got a barcode on it for interacting with it. If you didn't have a passive reader, you could scan the barcode, and also having human readable content on the outside as well. The next is a hard rugged tags, and this is an example of the XO 800 tag. It's an IP68 rated tag, so it's very durable. These are typically zip tied or chicken wired onto some pipe spools or onto structural steel. Could be zip tied onto cable reels. I'll show a few examples of that here in a minute. And there's also label tags, so tags that can be printed from a printer, such as like a Zebra printer, or they can print out rolls of different tags that can be adhered to materials, which also can have a barcode on the front of it and various bits of human readable content on it as well. So next, talk a little bit more in depth about the actual handheld. So we talked about the TSL. It's a Bluetooth reader that connects to devices. So it can connect to a phone, to a tablet via Bluetooth. So you're not tethered with a cord or anything like that. And the bottom left is another example of a TSL. This is more of a wearable type barcode passive RFID reader that can fit around your ring hand and allow flexibility of your hand as you're reading tags, as you're scanning barcodes and doing other activities. So these are some examples of the readers that we have in the industry. And we have the vehicle mount reader. I touched on this earlier, but just get a little bit more in depth in this. So the vehicle reader consists of two antennas that run two antenna cables into a NEMA enclosure, which houses an RFID reader. That RFID reader is then run to a tablet in the cab, which computes the reads and then pushes that back to cloud-based software to update locations of assets in the laydown yard. All this can be, hardwired directly to your battery. So when the car cranks up, the reader kicks on and away you go. The next example of a reader are our fixed readers. This can be, choke point readers at a fabricator shop or at a supplier shop, maybe at a marshaling yard, at your project entrance or exit. Even getting down into your laydown yards or work face entrance and exits to track your items via reads in throughout your supply chain, whether it be intra-site or outside of your site throughout your kind of global supply chain, if you will. So then you have field mobility devices. So this is a major piece of the equipment as well that allows for you to not only read the tags, but then compute that tag read into actionable data and conduct transactions with those materials throughout its life cycle. So these are two examples of Samsung tablets that are offered, and then also your more workhorse type tablet would be your Panasonic ToughPad FCG1. Now this is our intrinsically safe type tablet that allows for use in an operating type capacity. So, I want to talk a little bit about testing, certification, and results. So before I go to the next slide, we've got a lot of great technology that I just went through and showed. Everything from a cheaper alternative RFID tag, a lower cost, to all the devices, to all the readers, and that's great, right? It's nice and pretty, but let's get to the real facts. Does it work in our industry? And that's been a major hurdle in terms of passive RFID tags in construction. Some of the biggest hurdles are that it won't work because of the read range, right? The limitations of read range. My laydown yard is too big. I can't use it. They're all valid concerns, right? And you have the other concern of, I have a yard full of metal. Passive RFID tag doesn't work around metal. Well, we can sit there and listen to that, or we can actually go out and try and put a solution that does work. And that's really where we went. And we started driving testing and certification and trying to understand, bottom line, the goal was feasibility. Can passive RFID tags be used in a construction laydown yard application? The answer is yes. I'm 100% convinced of that. We're convinced of it, and it's being used today to provide great results and great value. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually did that testing to confirm that it would work, right? So I think there's a couple different things. You can have an RFID tag in a basement office or in a workspace where everything's real shiny and everything reads great. And yeah, you can say, okay, it's great, let's go sell it, right? But until you actually get out in the real world and put tags on materials, see how they work in a laydown yard, you don't have a solution. So you need to really go out and ensure that this stuff that you're putting in front of the clients works. So here's an example of some of our tags in our test yard. Not the prettiest test yard, but it's absolutely perfect for functionality. So we've got a couple tags put on pipe spools here and cable reels and other various bits of pipe. Just a couple pictures there to kind of show how how those are attached. So you got your pipe here with your chicken wire and your tag attached to it. You can zip a 1/4 inch screw into the side of this cable reel, and we got a hang tag wrapped around some banding of maybe other applications that could be stuck onto that material as well. So a few different ways to attach those materials. But as I mentioned, the goal for testing was feasibility. So we thought to ourselves, we're not going to be able to test this without the help from a construction partner, right? So we're based in Birmingham, Alabama, and we got linked up with a local construction firm, Saya Construction, whose primary focus is underground development for residential and commercial. So they run a lot of the sewer pipes and a lot of the power lines for these commercial and residential developments. So they had a huge yard here in Fultondale that was full of surplus materials. So they use these materials every once in a while, but most of the time they sat idle up there and nobody really went into the yard. So it's kind of the whole saying, one man's junk's another man's treasure, right? So we went out to this yard for a period of months, honestly, and attached hundreds of RFID tags, passive RFID tags, to the materials in the yard at random. We hid some. We made them very difficult to, covered in metal, just not the old happy path, right, sitting on top, because honestly, you're not going to have the happy path every time in the real world. So our testing had to be real world focused. So by putting all these tags on the materials, we also brought out our vehicle mount reader and then swept the laydown yards, located the tags, and did it continuously, and got averages of GPS distance, accuracy, and also the signal strength that was coming off of the tags, because the biggest misconceptions were the signal strength was too low and the tags will not work around metal. That was completely proven false. We saw an average GPS accuracy of under 3 meters, which is incredible. So what that means is if you have a piece of material out in the laydown yard, you put a passive RFID tag on it, you sweep it, you can navigate to that within under 3 meters. Couple that with an RFID reader, and I'll show an example of this in a minute. You can get pinpoint accuracy on location of your materials with a passive RFID system in a laydown. Some of the other facts that we saw, the longest read range that we had with the VMR, vehicle mount reader antenna, was 16 meters, which is pretty significant for a passive RFID tag. I think it's somewhere over 50 foot. I don't have a converter in front of me, but for our, so about 50 foot on that. And we were consistently reading at 10 meters. And that's significant right there. And I'll show why here in a minute, but the 10 meter consistent read range is very, very important. So by going out and confirming in the real world that it works, we have a viable solution that can start providing value to our clients. So how is it being used today? I really want to kind of get down into the use cases. So in supply chain, passive RFID tags is not a new concept, right? So many of the larger retail, Amazon, Walmart, have been using passive RFID tags in supply chain for many years, right? It's starting to be more and more adopted within the construction supply chain, and a lot of great values coming out of it. So, tagging upstream and a vendor and supplier in construction at some of your major equipment providers, your fabricators, allow for almost an automated expediting. So you can see when tags are being placed on materials and being broken out, put in separate crates, and you can have this electronic packing list creation of assets that are inbound to your job site or going throughout your supply chain. And then also coupling that by leveraging downstream technologies such as gate readers to provide real-time data. So being able to know when a crate full of components has left your fabricator, being read at a marshaling yard, at a staging yard, when it hits your project gate, all the way through when it hits your laydown yard, down to the very smallest part. So very, very powerful in terms of supply chain visibility and providing data that's very, very accurate, that's not based on just email conversations back and forth between expediters and suppliers. It's really real-time data now. So another use case of passive RFID is for field transactions. So, leveraging passive RFID tags increase productivity. So, you take your traditional way of material receiving is truck comes in, you get the bill of lading, they give you a packing list, and you go through and you check off the items on a piece of paper. Well, now by you leveraging passive RFID tag functionality, you can scan those assets. You can open the crate, scan the contents of the crate, and know what's there. So the material receiving process is greatly, productivity is greatly improved. Your warehouse management and laydown yard management. So no more location change adjustment paperwork. So this is one of them that is is very important. So you move 10 assets in your laydown yard or into your warehouse. The vehicle of getting that updated into a system is typically a piece of paper called a location change or an inventory adjustment, whatever you want to call it. But you write down what asset you moved, what location it moved from, and where it moved to, then key that into the system. Now, being able to have everything passive RFID tag, you can walk around with a reader, engage that reader, scan and update the locations of the assets to eliminate that transactional updates of location changes. And then inspections of materials. So as you're doing preservation and maintenance or any type of other inspection of an asset, you positively identify that asset. And I'll talk a little bit about positive identification through RFID here in a minute, kind of on the supplier end, but always be able to know by scanning that asset, what asset you're actually looking at. Maybe the hang tag fell off that was provided by the vendor or something along those lines, but being able to have that passive RFID tag on there, you can always positively identify that. And then picking a material. So this is one that has been traditionally the main focus of RFID and construction, and that is your typical track and trace, right? That's pretty much how RFID got started in construction. Is I need to find my item faster, and that was typically done with active RFID tags. Now, with passive RFID tags, you have a lower cost of entry, thus you can saturate more of your materials, thus increasing your productivity when it comes to finding materials in the field. So various studies have shown utilizing RFID tags, form of auto identification, can allow you to locate assets 9 times faster during the picking process. So that's significant in terms of productivity. So laydown yard management. So as I mentioned earlier, the lower cost of RFID tags, the cost of entry for a passive RFID tag, allows for a greater saturation of items to be tagged. So this allows for you to conduct vehicle mount sweeps of all your assets and continually produce cycle counts and continually update and inventory all of your assets in your yard greater than what you were able to do with an active tag, because you can saturate the materials more. So we talked a little bit about how RFID is being used and through supply chain, through field transactions, through laydown yard management. The next kind of piece I want to talk about is really strategies for success, how to implement. So when we've identified that RFID is a fit for our company, we need to look about the strategies, how to make it successful for implementation, because you can have the greatest piece of technology in the world, but if you don't implement it properly, train properly, and have work processes to support that technology, it will fail. It will fail. It's not a magic bullet. I think that's a major misconception in the industry. So what are some of the strategies for implementation? So I'm going to get very cliche, right? Start early. That's a pretty cliche statement, but it's true. It's very, very true. So supplier engagement. So what I mean by that is like, okay, if you're engaging a supplier and you've developed the RFID system and process for your project execution, you need to get your suppliers on board if you want to tag upstream. So being able to write your contract language to specifically state what's the expectation of the supplier during the bid phase is extremely important, because they're still trying to win work and they're more likely to participate in your system and in your requirements during the bid phase. So start early, write it in the contract language of what's expected by the supplier. Understand their willingness to participate. So are they on board or are they not, right? If they're not, develop a plan for that. Maybe it's a data management plan. There's various ways to get the suppliers on board and have them participate, and most likely they'd be willing to participate. Finally, I think one of the most interesting ones are your suppliers already leveraging passive RFID tags in their materials? So there's a couple cool stories on RFID Journal if you guys get a chance to read it. The first one there is kind of Newman Valves. There's a lot of talk about using RFID to verify and validate assets. So Newman Valves had a major problem with counterfeit production of their valves. And so they actually took passive RFID tags and embed them in each one of their valves so that they could positively identify that that valve was that serial number, it came from that location, and had all the proper documentation and data specifications that the client had purchased from them. So they're already using RFID in their valves. You can leverage that and use that for your advantage during the construction and operation phase as well. Another one is Cameron. They have various different flow systems and instrumentation that they provide to large industrial projects. So they're tagging a lot of their equipment with RFID tags for inventory management purposes. So that exists, the data exists, incorporate that into your strategy. But if you have to start early and ensure that your suppliers are on board, and you can leverage existing RFID for downstream processes on your project. Plan with the end in mind. So I'm full of cliche statements today, I guess, right? So, but seriously, plan with the end in mind. So as I mentioned earlier, the 10 meters was significant, right? So in a laydown yard, your grid spaces, your A1s, your B2s, whatever it may be, are typically going to be somewhere around 10 meters. Well, make sure that those are going to be 10 meters when you're implementing a passive RFID system. And I'll show why that's important in a minute. But if your read range is 10 meters, you can drive a truck through here and be able to pick up this grid, pick up that grid, no problem. You can pick up all your materials without actually having to go inside of your grid and sweep. So start with the end in mind with your laydown configurations. Develop smaller grid locations, keep grid locations 10 meters by 10 meters and back to back, right? And that's not a major problem. That's most of how the grid locations are typically set up. From what I've seen, and maybe it's not always the case, but if you keep that in mind when you're starting and implementing an RFID system, it will pay dividends in the end for you in terms of sweep potential. And then if you have that, the largest read range requirement for being swept is only 10 meters. So it's completely possible, completely feasible. So you have a truck here, 10 meters, truck there, 10 meters, and it's 20 meters wide. You can still get a boom truck in there and pick your spools, pick your steel, whatever it may be, to deliver to construction. So the next one is sweep patterns. So really focusing on strict work processes. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have the greatest technology in the world and implement that on your project, but if you don't have the work processes to support the technology, it will most likely crumble. So you have to have strict work process set in place. And this starts with sweep patterns. So an active RFID tag sweep could typically be pretty loose, right? You could drive through the middle of the laydown yard and pick up tags around you because of the read range. That's why active has historically been extremely valuable in the industry and still is today. But with a passive RFID tag implementation, you have to be a little bit tighter on your sweeps. So I'm going to run a little illustration here to show what I mean by that. So you've got your truck that comes into your laydown yard, and they need to hug the grid locations. Hug the grid locations on both sides, and that will allow for you to get that read range of the 10 meters and be able to pick up all the assets in your laydown yard. Whereas an active sweep, you may just drive down the middle, drive down this middle, and go forth. So you have to be very conscious about your work processes when deploying passive RFID system, and the value will be great. It'll pay off for itself. But once again, support with strict work processes. So next is, in line with strict work processes is sweep frequency. So there's two vehicles of sweeping, right? There's obviously the vehicle mount reader, and then there's also the handheld reader, so kind of a foot sweep, if you will. So a vehicle mount reader, there's two different types of sweeps for a vehicle mount reader. I really call them kind of purposeful and background. And so a purposeful sweep is set a schedule. So, that may be, Jimmy, go get the truck every 2 days, drive all the laydown yards, every 3 days, every 4 days, whatever that may be, depending on the activity in your yard. That's a set strict work process that you develop at the beginning of a project. And you have a background sweep. So that's kind of the secondary type sweep. So this could be an RFID reader that's placed on a vehicle that frequents a storage area. So a forklift, a foreman's gator, he's running back and forth in and out of the laydown yard. Have him engage the sweep as he's going from point A to point B, and it's sweeping everything around them. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone at that point. Same thing with the handheld sweep. So get your TSL, get your phone, and walk out in the field once a week and sweep your laydown yard with the reader. And you can walk up in grids where it's safe to walk and just sweep around and get a lot closer than the vehicle could. And this is just a supplemental sweep to your vehicle mount reader that's providing you, weekly, every couple of days, whatever that sweep pattern is, a 100% cycle count of all your passive RFID tag material, so you know what's in your laydown yard and where it's at. I mean, that's significant in terms of planning and construction feasibility. And then same thing for the handheld sweep, kind of a background sweep. So engage the reader as you're out in the yard doing other activities. So as you're out receiving materials, engage the sweep, have it running in the background, and it's sweeping everything that you're walking around. So you're not purposely out there sweeping, but you're sweeping again, killing two birds with one stone. So really focusing on work processes to support the technology. And then know the end goal in your materials. So what I mean by that is there are thousands of form, fit, and functions for passive RFID tags out there in the industry. It's vitally important to select the proper tags for the application and how to apply. So how we do it, we go through what's called a tagging strategy. So we take a look at all the materials that need to be tagged on the project and determine the best auto identification for those materials. So for a passive RFID tag type deployment, there's thousands of form, fit, and functions out there, but we have a subset that we've certified, as I was mentioning in the previous slides, that work best on certain materials. So is it metal mount tags? Is it off metal? Is it on a wooden cable reel? So these are things to think about that, as a consultant, we can help drive through that tagging strategy to ensure that the proper tag is selected. Next part of that is you may select the right tag, but how are you applying it? So if you got a pipe and you got a tag that's metal mount and you put it inside that pipe, it's not gonna do any good. It's not gonna read through there. The sound will be attenuated. So you need to make sure that's placed on the outside. And you got to make sure it's placed in a spot that's not going to get crushed. So if you see the example to the right here, I've got a couple of I-beams. You don't really want to put that up under the channel here because that obviously would have the sound attenuated. So maybe you could put it on top. Some of the things to consider is if you're stacking these, the top wouldn't be feasible. You have a hang tag off here. So really trying to look and understand how your materials are going to be managed. Are you going to bundle your steel? Are you going to send them piece by piece? Really affects your overall tagging strategy on a project. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth now about kind of the misconception that passive tags don't work on metal. So I've got a video here that I'm going to play. Hopefully the sound works. So if you guys can turn up the sound on your monitors at this point, that would be good. I'm going to play a quick little video. So in this example, I've got two passive tags. I actually got one passive tag that's exactly the same. And I placed them one on metal, one off metal at exactly the same distance, and be able to show that the metal mount tag actually works better on metal, right? Thus the name. So, but it kind of debunks the myth of passive RFID tags not working well around metal. So turn your volume up. I'm going to start this quick little video. Oh, there we go. So this is a tag on metal, a metal mount tag on metal. Engage the reader. And note where it gets the RSSI signal strength meter up to. This is not on metal, same distance, same tag. It's less strong. So you notice here, the metal mount tag actually performed better on metal. So that kind of debunks the method or the mentality that passive tags won't work on metal. So it's pretty interesting thing to look at, and that kind of reinforces the know your materials and know what you're putting on them and ensure that you're putting the right tag for the application, not only in the right spot, but overall make sure it's just the right tag, because not every passive tag will work on every single piece of material. So it's very important to start that process and focus on that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the value of the system, what we're seeing out there with these tags that have been deployed. So obviously increased upstream visibility. We talked a little bit about, passive RFID tags are not new to supply chain, but they're new to construction supply chain, if you will. So some of the things that we're seeing out there is visibility into vendor supply packages of components. This is the dreaded term, ship loose components, right? Items come to site in one lot and there's 5 truckloads of it. But if you're actually going upstream and touching and RFID tagging or identifying those items one by one, or at least by a crate level, box level, you're able to see what's inbound to your job site and have a electronic packing list. So really elimination of, a common question, what crate is thermal well 204 TW001 in from vendor XYZ? Well, now you know. Now you can see what crate it's in, when it was scanned last through a gate reader, maybe at your fabricator, maybe at your supplier, maybe at your project site, but increase that upstream visibility in your supply chain. So one lot elimination is key. And then reduction in OS&Ds and issues with supplier shipments. So if you have an automated way to receive your materials and you're engaging an RFID reader and scanning those RFID tags, you're pre-populating a list of what's expected versus what's there, and it's creating OS&Ds. And not only that, but preventing having an OS&D come to site because the supplier is more involved in touching the items rather than just dumping them into a crate. They're more, they're identifying, they're tagging them prior to them coming to site. So accurate counts and accurate item identification is key. So then automated transactions. So as I discussed, reduce transaction time. So the ability to scan a passive RFID tag to populate a list of what's in a crate, what's on the truck, and versus what was expected, significantly reduces the manual counting exercises. So engaging a reader over the top of a crate rather than checking off line by line on a piece of paper what items are in that crate. I mean, I don't think I have to explain it. It obviously increases transaction time and worker productivity significantly. So temporarily misplaced materials. So this one's key. So, a traditional metric that we've used for any track and trace deployment over the years has been a term of temporarily misplaced materials. I don't like to use the word lost materials. I'm a former materials manager, and we never lose anything. We may just temporarily misplace it for a minute. Well, whether you lose it or you temporarily misplace it, it's an impact to your project and to your cost, right? So you want to put metrics to avoid temporarily misplacing your materials. So you can do that by RFID tagging your assets. So once again, by having a lower cost of entry with a lower cost passive RFID tag that works fantastic on the laydown, you can saturate your materials more, right? And so it's a lower cost of entry for, a smaller size project. And so, various industry studies have shown that 9% of materials will be temporarily misplaced at some point in their life cycle. So what that means, and I'll show a graph here in a minute and kind of a busy chart, but I'll just explain that. It basically says that at some point, 9% of your materials will have some issue. So Bob goes out, tries to find a spool, a valve, whatever it may be, and it's not in the location that it was supposed to be on the paperwork. So you got to go back to the office and you got to find the last known, go talk to somebody else, go get Jerry because he can find everything in the field. And they go back out, spend a couple more hours. And by the time you get 3 or 4 people involved in it, you've burned 30, 40 hours of time looking for a single item very quickly. That adds up significantly. So if we get a chart here and we take, for example, 25,000 pieces of material that are RFID tagged in your laydown yard, let's focus strictly on the laydown yard. That may be spools, maybe steel, maybe control valves, cable reels. You can expect 9% of those to come up missing. And honestly, you're running a 91% accurate inventory. If we were in, working for Amazon or some facility like that, that's not very good, right? You're running a 99% accurate inventory. But in a construction yard where it's a temporary facility, it's chaos, the pirate ship on land, a 91, 92% accurate inventory, it's pretty daggum good. But that 9% causes issues and costs money. So let's eliminate that 9%. So that means that, on average, 2,200 items out of 25,000 will have some sort of issue in terms of locating or being able to identify. So if we break that down and we look at an all-in labor rate of, $50, plug in whatever you want for your project, that comes out to a significant cost in terms of hours to locate. So it's saying not all 2,200 of those are going to take 40 hours to locate, only a small subsection of those. And you come down to really quickly on 25,000 items at a $50 rate of $1.3 million in cost avoidances, or cost of your project if you were to, spend the time looking for those 9% materials, the temporarily displaced materials. So what I'm really getting at here is that passive RFID tags combined, very important part, combined with proper work processes will eradicate temporarily misplaced materials on your project and ultimately avoid significant cost to your project. So what I mean by that, so this is your traditional track and trace, real quick video. So once again, turn up your volume. If you turn it down again, I'll show what that looks like. But in this example, this is a track and trace with passive RFID. Many of you may have seen track and trace with active RFID. This is a track and trace using I think it was a Samsung S8, a TSL 1128, and then a XO 800 passive RFID tag in a laydown yard at our test yard. So I'll go ahead and start this quick video. So the worker can find this asset 101AX. You see a map. The blue is the worker, the red is the material, and tells you how far away you are from that material. And as you get closer, you'll hear the reader engage, and then it'll zero you in right on top of that material. RFID readers engaged. And you see now it goes up, boom. There you go. So you've successfully found your item that you're looking for, 101AX1DR. And that's with passive RFID tags. So it navigates you to that GPS location under 3 meters, and then the RFID reader will engage and zero you in like a metal detector. So kind of wrapping up here a little bit, just want to talk about data production. RFID provides a very, very unique data set, and really not around transactions. I mean, all that's great. You can do cycle times and you can understand how your workers are performing and interacting with materials. That's important. But one of the most significant things that RFID provides is really material movements. So, and you can learn a lot about material movement. So why and how are materials moving? So if you take, for example, you've got a yard full of cable reels and they're constantly moving, you might ask yourself, why are they moving? Why are they moving from grid A1 to B1? There may be a good reason, there may not. Every one of those material movements puts your worker in line of fire. It's a safety exposure. Every time you're lifting something heavy, not even heavy, every time you're lifting something on a job site, it exposes your worker to safety. So if you can take the data that's provided from an RFID system that tells you how many times items are moving about your job site, you start asking the questions, why? Maybe I should put my laydown yard in a different location. Maybe I should plan better in terms of my size of my laydown yard so I don't have to keep shuffling items. Whatever it may be, it allows for a data set that ultimately would have to have a single person in the laydown yard with a clipboard all day, every day, capturing locations of materials. So double handling equals safety risk, right? The cable reel example. Once again, with passive RFID technology, it's an affordable solution, and it allows for more items to be RFID tagged. And so what that means with more items RFID tagged, the larger set of data, right? But I'll put a thing in there. One of the things that you see, and oftentimes, and really in any industry, not just construction, is don't just collect data to collect data. Make sure that you're collecting, number one, useful data, and then taking that data and turning it into action, right? So if you're getting this information from an RFID system that's telling you, hey, you're moving these items 5, 6, 7 times, don't just shrug your shoulders and put it on a shelf and move on to the next project. Analyze that, understand why, because you're ultimately putting your workers in harm's way, and you could use that data that's derived from an RFID system in a very, very helpful way, and maybe send somebody home at the end of the day safely, right? That may have not had that opportunity. So don't just collect it, put it on a shelf, collect it, analyze it, because collecting it and not using it costs money. It costs money to collect, it costs money to store data. to make sure that you're actually using it in a correct manner. Very kind of simple question, but use data to get better, right? So, in all this, hopefully it was, valuable information. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions and answers. Hopefully you guys learned some today. I'm hoping I can answer a few questions for you guys. So I'll kind of just turn it over to Eva at this point to, ask any questions.
Thank you so much, John. So we have quite a few questions that have come through, so I'm going to probably move through them a little bit fast. First question, what is the life of a passive RFID tag as used in facility operations?
That's a great question. I'm sitting there on mute talking away. Let me unmute my phone. No, that's a great question. And that's typically one that we run into with, active RFID tags, because they have a battery, they have a lifespan. With a passive RFID tag, it's one of the huge advantages. They don't really have a lifespan. I mean, you can use a passive RFID tag for many, many, many years because they don't have a battery that expires on the inside of them like an active RFID tag does. So for, pushing that and leveraging that tag into operations, and commissioning, startup, turnover, and operations is a great advantage to a passive RFID system for sure. That's a good question.
So a second question kind of comes with the scenario. The main question is, how do passive RFID tags get linked to material? But this particular scenario is in reference to a field inspector or lab technician, and they want to associate it to a test data.
Okay, that's a good question. So I'll kind of break it into maybe two parts there. So the first one is you have an asset. So you have a piece of equipment, if you will. It's called association. So you take the RFID tag and you can find the asset in the system and do what's an association, scan the barcode on the tag, and those items are linked at this point. So now you know that if you read the EPC RFID tag number 123XY, that is ultimately associated to that piece of equipment. And then you can track it throughout its life cycle, whether it be doing inspections on it, whether it be tracking where it's at in your laydown yard, and so forth. The second piece of that is, there's documentation, there's testing plans, there's preservation and maintenance activities that need to take place that are all linked to that actual material ID. And so you can leverage that passive RFID to go find that asset, to conduct all that. You can pull up the test reports, you can pull up the data specifications, whatever you will, that's linked to that actual asset. But it all starts with the association of the tag and the linking of the asset. And then you can have whatever data set you want to have back behind it that supports your work processes.
Okay. This particular question is a little bit more along the lines of the literal tag and its longevity. It's kind of a two-parter. Can it withstand, or is it resistant to UVR, and or can it be dipped in, well, answer that part and I'll go to the secondary component. Oh, dipped in galvanized, hot dipped galvanized process.
Yeah, we get that question quite a bit. It's a really good one too. So the first part is yes, there are tags that are 100% UV resistant and are very purpose built for being outside and exposed to different levels of radiation and so forth. There's kind of the benefit of passive RFID because there's literally thousands of different tags. I mean, there's tags that I showed here that can be attached, with very basic, like a zip tie or chicken wire, whatever you will, rebar tie wire. But there's also tags for, downhole drill piping that are actually embedded in the collar of the piping with a special tool that are used to track individual drill pipes and stuff like that. So there's thousands of different tags that can meet the requirements specified by the client. In relation to the galvanizing, I mean, that's some nasty stuff, right? When you put that on tags, there are tags that are meant to withstand that, but there's also work process to support that. So maybe it's you don't often like that. Put a tag on and take the tag off, dip it in galvanized, put it back on. There's a lot of risk for human error in there. So two of the options would be find a tag that can withstand that, which, like I said, there's thousands out there that can, or attach the tag after galvanization. So there's a couple of different, there's a technology answer and then kind of a work process that's specific for that client. And it's kind of part of the process during the assessment phase that needs to take place.
The starting early part that you mentioned, the cliché?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great part to do that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really is that. It's really how, let's take, for example, this is piping. This is pipe spools, right? So, maybe part of those are getting galvanized or painted. So how do you manage that? That's a work process that has to be determined at the front end. It's and how you interact with those. And maybe the answer is you get a tag that can withstand it. And maybe the answer is you tag it after it's galvanized. It really depends on that specific work process. I hope I answered that. I feel like I kind of
I think so.
danced around it.
I think that helped answer the question. Yes. So here's an interesting one. Can passive RFID tags be used to locate workers' exact positions?
So passive RFID tags can be used in employee tracking. Absolutely. There's lots of companies out there that do that. We focus specifically on materials, right? I mean, we've got partners that do plenty of employee tracking that we partner with on where it's required. We focus on materials. I'm not saying it's not on our roadmap to eventually get there, but we focus on materials. But to the question as an industry, yes, passive RFID tags can be used to track workers. Getting down to the exact location can be is more along the lines of like an RTLS system, which has its challenges in terms of kind of the RF and how the physics work with it. But it can be done. But yeah, that's something that can be done.
Okay. So this question, it's a two-parter, and it's a bit more about the software. So first, what type of software is used to read the passive RFIDs? And secondarily, how do you integrate it into your material system?
So we utilize RFID readers that have proprietary software that use in our JOVIC system, Job Site Visibility Extension System. And how that integrates is that those readers are directly connected to our software. So as RFID tags are associated to an item, every time that item is read with one of the RFID readers that's connected to JOVIX, it updates information about that item, whatever that may be, whether it's a gate read, it's a vehicle sweep in a laydown yard, but that's already part of the package. So, that's a great question. I tried to focus mainly on, kind of the hardware and readers side of things, but, there's also a software piece that takes that information and takes those reads and translates it into, into data, into actionable data, right? So the software is a major component of the system as well. I tried to really focus on kind of the hardware, but it's a great question.
Sure, absolutely. So as it references GPS, both positioning and the way to connect, how does passive RFID relate to that?
Yeah, so that's a great question as well. So, even with our active RFID tags, passive RFID tags, they do not contain GPS. So the tags itself do not contain GPS. GPS is derived from the actual devices interacting with it. So take a vehicle mount reader, for example. You've got a pipe spool in your laydown yard with a passive RFID tag on it that knows that it's connected to that spool. So as the vehicle drives around, it hears that tag and it knows the signal strength and it knows the GPS coordinate of that truck. Drives again, gets the same thing, again, gets the same thing, and it triangulates its location and places it down where that asset is. So there's actually no GPS inside the tag. There are GPS RFID tags out there, but those are primarily very expensive and used for tracking break bulk shipments across the sea, right? And they communicate to a satellite. In our typical deployments, our tags, passive and active, do not have GPS. It's derived from the actual vehicles. in the gate readers, and the asset is given a GPS coordinate, but it's based on the triangulation of the values from the sweep.
Okay. So this question is a little bit more on the process side, kind of that, cliche starting at the beginning, but how would you develop a process for RFID tagging when your vendor is not participating?
So there's just, I kind of take this example would be in the event that you started later than building something into a contractual requirement, the vendor may charge you to attach RFID tags to that. That's kind of the whole part of starting early, because they're hungry for work and they're willing to do that to win the bid. You start late, they're going to say, yeah, I'll do it. I'll charge you X number of dollars. So at that point, it's really a business decision to say, okay, we started late with the supplier, it was long lead items. We didn't implement the plan before it, but we still want to capture these items for downstream efficiencies. You can still RFID tag them once they get to the job site. It doesn't always have to start at the supplier. So, the more upstream that you can get in terms of attaching RFID tags, the greater visibility and greater value you'll get out of the system. But you can still tag those upon arrival at your project site or marshaling yard in the event that the vendor is not wanting to play nicely, if you will.
Okay. Well, there were quite a few questions, and the remainder questions that we do not have the time to get to, we will certainly follow up with on an individual basis. So know that your questions are not going to be left unanswered. And with this final slide, we wanted to remind people of our upcoming event here in Austin, Texas. It's called the Leadership Forum. John, if you can forward, there you go. The Leadership Forum, and this is a working meeting led by FIATech, but obviously it's a collaboration of all of the members and partners that really bring about innovative solutions. So we'd love for you to be here. It is October 25th and 26th in Austin, Texas, and it's a great time for you to be involved in making the movement of FIATech forward. We will be realizing the projects for 2018, as well as preparing for the upcoming technology showcase, which is in 2018, March 19th through 21st. So we'd love to have you. This recording will be available on the FIATech YouTube page shortly, and the Atlas RFID representatives will follow up with the questions that remain unanswered. So thank you all very, very much for taking the time to join in on this webinar, and stay tuned for future webinars. Thanks, everybody.